Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've sent us a really interesting stack of sources, all centered on, well, managing stress and anxiety. It's a big topic.
It really is. And these sources cover quite a range. We've got articles on practical techniques, like breathing exercises, grounding methods.
Right.
And then there's a systematic review that actually looks at the research behind one specific technique, diaphragmatic breathing.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack these sources. We want to get the key insights, understand how these immediate techniques are supposed to work, what the actual evidence says about them, and importantly, how they fit into the bigger picture of managing anxiety, maybe more long term.
Absolutely.
Right.
Connecting those quick tools to the sort of overall strategy.
Exactly. So let's start where the sources start with breathing. They really highlight how simple breathing can be, well, surprisingly powerful.
Yeah, it's presented as this tool you always have with you.
Yeah.
One of the main ones discussed is diaphragmatic breathing. You might know it as belly breathing.
Okay, belly breathing. How does that work according to the articles?
Well, the idea is to get comfortable, maybe sit or lie down. You put one hand on your chest, the other on your belly. Then you breathe in deeply through your nose, really trying to let your belly rise with the breath while your chest rests. It stays relatively still.
I see. So the breath goes low.
Right. And then you exhale slowly, maybe through your mouth, feeling the belly fall. The suggestion is to do this for, say, 5 or 10 minutes.
And the why behind this? Why does this specific way of breathing help?
The sources explain it helps kickstart your body's relaxation response, the opposite of fight or flight. It encourages fuller oxygen exchange and can help dial down physical stress symptoms like a racing heart or muscle tension. They flag it as especially useful for ongoing chronic stress and anxiety.
Interesting. Okay, another one you shared was the 4-7-8 method. Sounds quite specific.
It does, yeah. It is a definite rhythm. You sit comfortably, inhale quietly through your nose for a count of 4.
4 seconds in. Okay.
You hold that breath for a count of 7.
Hold for 7.
And then you exhale completely, maybe audibly, through your mouth for a count of 8. And repeat that cycle a few times.
4 in, hold 7, 8 out. That hold and the long exhale seem key.
They do. And interestingly, one source mentioned the exact timing isn't as crucial as keeping the ratio. So if holding for 7 feels like too much, you could do like 2, 3.54, keeping that same pattern.
Ah, okay. So it's the rhythm itself. Why is this pattern supposed to work?
Well, the sources describe it almost like a natural tranquilizer for the nervous system. The thinking is it slows the heart rate, boosts oxygen, and the focus on counting and breathing helps shift your attention away from anxious thoughts. That longer exhale, the 8 count, is seen as a strong signal to the body to just relax.
Makes sense. And then there's box breathing, also called 4-square breathing.
Right. This one's about equal parts. You inhale slowly through the nose for 4 counts.
Okay.
Hold your breath for 4 counts.
Hold 4.
Exhale slowly through the mouth for 4 counts.
Exhale 4.
And then you pause with lungs empty for 4 counts before the next inhale.
So like drawing a square with your breath. In, hold, out, pause, all for 4.
Exactly. And you'd repeat that for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. The sources suggest this helps regulate the nervous system, reduce stress, clear your head. Again, engaging that parasympathetic calming side. Useful if you're feeling overwhelmed or need to refocus.
So what ties all these breathing techniques together based on what you read?
I think the main thing is accessibility. They're free. You can do them anywhere, anytime, by yourself. They offer a way to find some quick relief and promote calm. One article even suggested doing some slow, deep breathing first, before even trying other coping stuff for anxiety.
Like a foundation. Okay, so from focusing inward on the breath, the sources then shift to focusing outward, using your senses. Grounding techniques.
Yeah, this is about using your immediate environment to anchor you, especially when feelings like anxiety or panic get really intense, or you feel kind of detached.
And the main one detailed is the 5-4-3-2-1 method.
Right. This one's described as really helpful if you feel overwhelmed or like your mind is just bouncing all over the place.
So how does it work? You've maybe done some breathing, settled a bit, then what?
Then you go through your senses. First, you consciously acknowledge 5 things you can actually see around you. Look for details.
Okay, 5 things I see.
Then 4 things you can physically touch. Feel their texture, temperature.
4 things I touch.
Got it. Next, 3 things you can hear. And the key here is focusing on external sounds. Not the ringing in your ears, but maybe traffic, a bird, the hum of a fridge.
Right, outside sounds, 3 of those.
Then 2 things you can smell. Might take a moment, but focus on what scents are actually there.
2 smells, okay.
And finally, 1 thing you can taste. Maybe the lingering taste of coffee or just the neutral taste in your mouth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See, touch, hear, smell, taste. It sounds almost too simple. How does that help with something as big as panic?
Well, the sources explain it works by deliberately hijacking your focus. Instead of being lost in the internal storm of anxiety or physical sensations, you're forcing your attention onto the concrete external world, right here, right now. It anchors you in the present and can interrupt that spiraling thought pattern or panic cycle.
That makes sense. Redirecting the spotlight.
Exactly. And the sources mention other grounding ideas too, like really focusing on one single object, its details, or visualizing a safe place in your mind. Even just listening closely to music or carrying a familiar object like a smooth stone can help pull you back.
And these grounding techniques are specifically suggested for panic attacks.
Yes, very much so, as a way to try and regain some sense of control and maybe lessen the intensity of the symptoms when they hit hard.
Okay, so we have these really practical, immediate tools, breathing, grounding, but what about the science? How solid is the evidence, particularly for something like the breathing techniques? That systematic review you sent digs into this, right?
It does. And it's quite specific. It looked only at diaphragmatic breathing, that belly breathing we talked about first.
Right.
The goal was to see if just doing that on its own, without adding meditation or yoga or anything else, actually helps reduce physiological and psychological stress in adults.
And they were picky about which studies they included.
Very picky. They wanted to isolate the effect of the breathing itself, so studies that combined it with other practices were kicked out.
Right, to avoid confounding factors. So with those strict rules, how many studies actually made the cut?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. They started with over 700 potential papers.
Wow.
But only 3 studies actually met all their criteria, just 3. One was a randomized controlled trial. The other 2 were quasi-experimental.
3 out of hundreds. That's surprisingly few. What did those 3 studies find then?
Well, despite being few and quite different from each other, the review found that all 3 did show that diaphragmatic breathing had positive effects on stress measures.
Okay, positive effects. Like what specifically?
So the randomized trial found that people who practiced diaphragmatic breathing regularly over 8 weeks had significant decreases in their breathing rate and significantly lower levels of cortisol in their saliva. Cortisol is a key stress hormone, a biomarker.
So a measurable physical change related to stress.
Exactly. Another study found significant drops in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure right after just 1 session of deep breathing, compared to people just breathing normally.
Just 1 session. Okay.
And the third study looked at perceived stress over 9 months using a standard questionnaire, the DAS-21 stress scale. And again, they found a significant decrease in self-reported stress levels in the breathing group compared to a control group.
So promise shown on both physical markers, cortisol, blood pressure, breathing rate, and on how stressed people felt.
Correct. But, and this is a big but, the review emphasizes.
The limitations.
Exactly. While the findings are positive, the review concludes the overall evidence is still limited. Because there were only 3 very different studies, they couldn't statistically pool the results for a really strong conclusion.
Makes sense.
Plus, there were issues like small sample sizes in some studies, differences in how long or often people did the breathing, who the participants were, college students here, industrial workers there, which makes it hard to generalize.
Right. Can we apply this to everyone?
And they also noted limitations in how the studies were designed, potential for bias, and even a lack of detail on who taught the breathing technique. So the certainty of the evidence, especially for the physiological measures like blood pressure and cortisol, was rated as low. It was moderate for the perceived stress measure.
So the takeaway is promising signs, but we need more research.
Pretty much. The review suggests diaphragmatic breathing has positive effects, but the evidence base is limited. We need more high-quality, rigorous studies focusing just on this technique, maybe using more objective stress markers to really solidify its standing.
Okay, so breathing and grounding are valuable for the moment, and the science on breathing is, let's say, cautiously optimistic, but needs more work. But what about recurring problems, like frequent panic attacks? The sources seem clear that just using these techniques during an attack isn't the whole story for long-term management.
That's a really crucial point they make. These techniques are great for immediate coping, for getting through an intense moment. But if anxiety or panic is a recurring issue, you need broader strategies. It's about shifting from just reacting to proactively building resilience.
And one big strategy mentioned is Don't avoid things.
Yeah, it sounds backwards maybe, but avoiding situations you link with panic like exercise because it raises your heart rate, or certain places can actually reinforce the anxiety.
How so?
Because you never learn that you can handle the feelings, or that the panic itself, while horrible, isn't actually dangerous. Avoidance just shrinks your world. The advice is to gradually, gently, re-engage with those avoided situations.
Okay. And similar to avoiding situations, they mention avoiding certain habits.
Right, like relying on safety behaviors, always carrying a specific water bottle, or only taking one route home. These might feel like they keep panic away, but they actually stop you from building confidence in your own ability to cope without these external crutches. Trying to slowly let go of those is suggested.
Self-medicating is another big don't.
Definitely. Alcohol is singled out as something that might feel like it helps short-term, but can make panic worse overall. And while certain prescribed meds, like tranquilizers, can be useful sometimes, the sources warn about long-term use and addiction potential. Medical advice is key there.
So if avoidance and self-medication aren't the answers long-term, what is recommended?
Seeking proven treatments is really emphasized. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, comes up repeatedly as highly effective. It directly teaches skills to manage anxious thoughts and physical responses.
Right, practical skills.
Exactly. Prescription medications, managed by a doctor and often taken consistently, are also mentioned as very helpful for many people. And exposure therapy, a specific type of behavioral therapy where you gradually confront feared situations or sensations in a safe way, is another option.
Learning about your triggers also seems important.
Yeah, figuring out if there are specific things that reliably seem to set off anxiety or panic can help you manage them better, reduce how often they happen, maybe lessen the intensity. Though it's noted some attacks just seem to come out of the blue. A professional can help sort out which triggers to face and which to perhaps navigate differently.
And underlying all this, basic lifestyle stuff.
Absolutely. Regular exercise, which long-term is great for panic, even if the initial heart rate increase feels tricky, meditation, good social support, healthy diet, staying hydrated, cutting back on caffeine and alcohol, all these general wellness things create a foundation that makes you less vulnerable to anxiety overall.
Okay, so pulling this all together from the sources, we have these really accessible, immediate tools, specific breathing patterns, grounding exercises that are presented as valuable for managing those acute moments of stress, anxiety, or panic.
Right. They're tools for this toolkit.
Yeah.
And then the research perspective, specifically on diaphragmatic breathing from that review, shows promising signs effects on things like breathing rate, blood pressure, cortisol, and how stressed people feel.
Uh-huh.
But it also clearly flags that the scientific evidence, while positive, is still pretty limited. We need more robust, focused studies to really understand the impact of this simple, potentially powerful technique.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? If the power to significantly influence our stress response lies, at least partly, within something as fundamental as our breath and our ability to just focus on the here and now, tools we literally carry with us constantly, how might really understanding and regularly practicing these basic techniques change how we cope day to day? Could it lessen our reliance on maybe less healthy or external methods? And, what else might future research uncover about the full potential hidden in just breathing and being present?